Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
We'll start off in Psalm 76 this morning. Yeah. It's not on. It's on, but it's another good day to be here in the house of the Lord. Beautiful morning. Of course, there's no better place to be in the house of the Lord, to be in His presence. But, again, we'll be starting at Psalm 76 this morning. Go ahead and get started. Psalm 76. In Judah is God known. His name is great in Israel. In Salem also is His tabernacle and His dwelling place in Zion. So it's saying, God is known of His people. He's there, He's present, they know Him, they've seen Him move, and they praise and worship His name there. Verse 3, there break He the arrows of the bow, the shield and the sword, and the battle. So He brings peace to His people where they are. He destroys the weapons of destruction and war. He brings peace to His people. Thou art more glorious and excellent than the mountains of prey. The stout-hearted are spoiled, they have slept their sleep, and none of the men of might have found their hands. So, saying that God is beautiful, He's wondrous, glorious. His presence being with Him is greater than anything that we can imagine. The stout-hearted have been spoiled. Those that are sleepy are sleeping, they're out of the way. The mighty men of war that come against them, they've not found their strength in their hands to fight against His people, and God's brought them peace. At Thy rebuke, O God of Jacob, both the chariot and horse are cast into a dead sleep. So again, this gives us hope and gives us peace and comfort, knowing that, when we're His and we're serving Him, that He will protect us, He will shield us, and He will deliver us through the bad times. And it doesn't matter what comes against us or how strong or mighty that army may be, that He has the power and authority to destroy them, to weaken them, take their strength, and give us peace and hope in Him. Verse 7, Thou, even Thou, art to be feared, and who may stand in Thy sight when once Thou art angry? Thou didst cause judgment to be heard from heaven. The earth feared and was still. So again, He does love us. He is a good Father, but we do have to fear Him. It has to be a respect that comes to Him, because when we stand in rebellion against Him, we don't listen, we don't obey. We are to be in fear of His wrath. And as complete and whole as His love and mercy and grace is, His vengeance and wrath is also full and complete. And when He's stirred up in anger, He's just as destructive as He is, helping and preserving. When God arose to judgment to save all the meek of the earth, Salah. So they're remembering the times when they were delivered from their enemies, that God, come and showed up. He protected them. He delivered them. He wiped the enemies away and drove back the armies, those that attacked Israel and was trying to destroy His people. Surely the wrath of man shall praise Thee. The remainder of wrath shalt Thou restrain. So we're seeing here that, that people that turn and repent, they can be saved when they turn and praise Him and repent. But those that remain in the wrath, in rebellion, they're going to be restrained and destroyed. Vow and pay unto the Lord your God. Let all that be round about Him bring presents unto Him that ought to be feared. So again, we have to make our vows to Him. We have to pledge our allegiance to Him and submit ourselves to Him. We pay our tributes to Him. The old times, they had to do sacrifices. Our sacrifices now, of course, is praise and worship and obedience. We pray, we seek His will, and we be obedient to Him. That's our sacrifice to Him. And, we honor Him and do what He asks us to do, and take care of His other people, those that are around us, and try to shine that light to the lost. He shall cut off the spirit of princes. He is terrible to the kings of the earth. And so he's saying here that, he has power over those that rule this earth, that have power here, earthly power, princes, kings, whatever they may be. He still has power over those, and if they are against him, he will cut them off, and he can destroy them when they work evil and they work against his kingdom and his people. Psalm 77. I cried unto God with my voice, even unto God with my voice, and he gave ear unto me. So when we cry out to him, he does hear us. He's not asleep. He's not dead. He's not too busy. He always hears when we cry out to him. He gives his ear to us. That's a blessing. That's a privilege that is bestowed upon us. That, when we're blood bought and we're his and we're obedient, that he does listen. He hears us. He hears our cries like a good father would. In the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. My sore ran in the night and ceased not. My soul refused to be comforted. So there was no peace on earth. There's nothing else we can find that's going to satisfy our soul, that's going to deliver us. It's going to be a complete healing, a complete deliverance, complete peace and joy. We cannot find that without God. Our soul will not be, it'll be sore, it'll be restless, it'll be uncomforted without him. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. Selah. The world got him down. The troubles and trials, the daily life, the things that was going on kind of beat him down. And he remembered, I still have a God here. I need to call out to him. I need to seek him. Spiritually I was overwhelmed. I needed to have a talk with my Father. Thou holdest mine eyes waking. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. So here Asaph's writing this, and he's saying, that he's thought back of all the times before and seen, that he's troubled and he doesn't know where to find his peace. And so he's remembering here, we have this mighty God that's delivered our forefathers, those before us. He's helped me before. I've sought him out, and he's delivered me before. And so I'm going to go back. I'm going to turn back to him again and have a hope in him that he can deliver again. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I commune with mine own heart, and my spirit made diligent search. So he's searching himself. He's remembering who this God is and who he is in God. He's searching his heart, and he's looking through his spirit. He's searching diligently to try to find God again. He's seeking his face. Will the Lord cast off forever, and will he be favorable no more? Is his mercy clean gone forever? Doth his promise fail forevermore? So this is that internal battle here. He's saying, well, I'm going through this struggle. I'm having this trial. And I'm remembering that God said he promised he'd be here and deliver me. Where is he? Is he here? Did he forget? Is he gone? And he's like, surely not. Hath God forgotten to be gracious? Hath he in anger shut up his tender mercies? Selah. So he's saying here, I made some mistakes here. Maybe he's turned away from me, but I don't think he is. I'm going to cling and hang on to him. And I said, this is my infirmity, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate also of all thy work and talk of thy doings. So he's saying, I'm going through some troubles. I'm going to cling to the hope in the Lord that he's not forgotten me. He's not forsaken me. He's still here with me. And I'm going to keep working my way through this until he provides his deliverance, till he shows up and he moves. Thy way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? So now he's praising him. He's in his troubles. He's in this trial, and he's turning back and saying, you know what? I remember how great you are and all the things you've done before, so I'm going to praise you. I'm going to give you the honor and glory. That there's some reason I'm going through this trial. Maybe it's to turn me back to you, so I'm just going to praise you anyway. I'm praise you when things were good. I'm going to praise you when things are bad. Thou art the God that dost wonders. Thou hast declared thy strength among the people. Thou hast with thine arm redeemed thy people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. So he's saying again here, you've showed your hand, you've showed your strength to your people before. And all the mighty things you've done before that our ancestors have wrote down and told the stories and passed down to us. And he's like, you've shown your strength. You've, we've declared this strength and we've seen it and we're passing it on to the children. And we've seen you move and we believe and we know how you are. And, of course, the sons of Jacob and Joseph, as referring to the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham. He's saying, you've moved upon our people before. You've delivered us, and I believe you will again, because we're still clinging to you, and you're still the same God you were. The waters saw thee, O God, the waters saw thee. They were afraid. The depths also were troubled. The clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Thine arrows also went abroad. The voice of thy thunder was in the heaven. The lightnings lightened the world. The earth trembled and shook. So he's saying, all these things that they've seen God do and move and how he's delivered in all these years and all those stories he's remembering in his mind and how God's mighty and how he has control over the seas and the rain and the thunder and the lightning and all the things of this world. They're his creation, and he has control. He can shake these things, he can move these things, and he can move men's hearts. Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters. Thy footsteps are not known. So his ways are way beyond ours. His strength is beyond our strength. His knowledge is beyond our knowledge. And, the things that he does, it's just our human minds can't comprehend. He's so mighty and great and wondrous. And we have to take peace in that, knowing that it may be out of our control. It may be out of our hands. We may not see an exit way to get out of where we're at. But God can open doors where there are no doors. And he knows. And he's giving him praise for that, saying, you are in control. No matter how crazy this seems to me, this is just a small task for you. And, you have control of this, Lord. And I'm praising you for that. That's what we need to do in our hard times. And remember, how great he is and how great he can move and the things that he does. There's nothing too great for him. There's nothing too small for him to move in. He is a wonderful God. Thou leddest thy people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. So again, he's saying, you led our people, you had leaders step up, those men of God that sought you, and they listened to you, and they led us through, like they were the earthly shepherds here to lead this, as sheep as we were flock. They were yours, they were chosen, and, they led us through by your guidance. So again, he's remembering all the times when God has moved, and he's hoping and praying and putting all his trust in the Lord to deliver him again. Psalm 78. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old. So here again, we've got Asa writing these things down, saying, God cries out to his people to listen, to give ear to him, to listen to the law that he's gave us. And incline their ears to his words that had come out of his mouth, the things that he said to his people, to believe these things and to know and to trust in him. Verse 3, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. So again, he said the forefathers, those that went before, they've written down all these stories, they've passed them down, orally, telling the stories to their children, and their children grew up and told them to their children and passed these things down like we need to do today. We need to tell our children what God's done for us. We need to pass these things along. We need to let our children spend time with their grandparents and let them tell them things God's done for them so they can see that this is a generational thing. That when we serve him and we give our families fully over to him and teach our children the way, they can grow up and have the same things that the forefathers have had with God, that same relationship. God doesn't change. The things he did for them, he can do for us too. And it's very important for us to pass this down, because if we don't tell the children, the world will surely tell them the things of this world and the evil things. So it's up to us. We're either going to tell them the good things of the Lord, or the world will teach them the bad things of the wicked. And that, it is a great responsibility that we have, but, in this day and time, we got to keep those kids close. And, the only way we're going to be able to do that is to be close ourselves. And that's, you can tell children whatever you want, but they're going to see what you walk in front of them. And if you talk the talk, they're going to see that. But if you walk the walk, they're going to know that. And that's a great burden and responsibility, but that's something that we should be desiring anyways. We should be seeking and wanting to be closer to the Lord for ourselves. And, by default, we're going to set that path for our children too, because they're going to follow our footsteps, And we got to set that example before them and do the best that we can. Which we have heard and known and our fathers have told us. Again, we need to pass that down. We need to tell them, show them how mighty God is, how He's moved and delivered us and things He's done for us. And, write these things down that He's done for them while they were young and small and they were too young to understand, and then share that with them. Let them know how God's moved for them even before they knew what it was or were old enough to comprehend these things. Verse 4. We will not hide them from the children, shewing to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and His strength and His wonderful works that He hath done. Again, we got to keep passing this down. We have to tell our children it's important to pass it down to their children. We have to keep that going and keep that blessing going, because it only takes one generation of silence to set them back. And if we don't tell the children, the world will fill them full of lies and deceit and hate and evil and wicked things. For He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children. So again, this is an order from the Lord. This is a commandment He gave us. He started it off with, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, passing it down the line. We were grafted into with the children of Israel through Christ and His shed blood. So this applies to us too. We need to teach our children the history. We need to teach them the Bible. We need to teach them the Word. We need to make sure they're in places where they're being taught, where they're hearing it preached, where, that this Word is passed along, that it's told that it is important. That this isn't just another book, that it is, a way of life for us. This is the Word. It's the truth. It's a connection to our Father. This is going to help us unlock these mysteries of God to us, that, when we study this Word, we hear it preached and we pray and we seek Him, that we'll find Him. This book is full of promises. And it's blessings that God can give us if we know, and then we know to seek Him and how to find Him. And this book's going to teach us. It's going to teach us to separate ourselves away from the ways of this world and the wicked and the evil things. It tells us what we shouldn't do. It tells us what we should do. It teaches us to be obedient, to seek Him, with all that we have. And when we do that, we can have these blessings. There's promises in this book. And we have to teach ourselves. We have to know what it is ourselves before we can teach the children. Verse 6, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. And again, if we forget the commandments and we forget to do the work and we forget to seek Him, we're going to separate ourselves from Him, and then we're going to separate our children from Him too. They're going to follow whatever it is that they see us doing. They may catch a little bit of us speaking our speech and saying things, but they're going to catch all of what they see us do. We have to walk in that light and walk in the right way so they can follow us there. Because they're going to follow the example that we set. Verse 8. And might not be, as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God. We saw this time and time again in the Old Testament and the books of the history, that have a good ruler come in, that have a good king that would seek God. He would do the best that he could to lead the people the right way and to set the example and set out discipline and the rules and make sure that everybody was seeking God and following Him, and they would flourish and grow. Their enemies would be broken. They would be weak. They couldn't come against Him. They would flourish and grow, Israel would. And they were blessed because they were seeking God and they were in His favor. And then they'd pass it to His son. The next ruler, the next king would come along and he would do okay, but he would let down just a few things. And then the next son would let down a few more. And next thing you know, they turned away from God. They were worshiping idols again. And their enemies were growing stronger and beating down the doors. And they would go back into captivity and be punished. They would go back into captivity and be slaves. a generation or two, they would cry out. We heard these stories of our great-great-grandfathers and how powerful and great they were and how they had all these things and how God blessed them. And, let's turn back to God. And God would rise up a leader that would lead them out. He would defeat their enemies and he would bring them back to fruition again. They would start growing and flourishing. Well, a generation or two down the road, they'd let it slip. And we saw that cycle over and over and over again. And that's something that we have to break. This is in here, and all these stories are there for a reason to show us, that if the majority of the people are seeking their own will, they're following their own lusts and enticements and pleasures, and they're turning away from God, He can't bless that people. As a whole, He cannot bless those people. Individuals can be blessed, but as a whole, when we're seeing that right now in our country, I feel like the standard's been dropped in this country as a whole, and we're seeing, rough times coming ahead. That the darkness is growing, and the evil and the wicked are out there proud, running up and down, and they're not even ashamed anymore to do all the wrathful and evil things that they're doing. And, God He can't bless that. He can't say, hey, these are all my people, and I'm going to bless this whole country when we're out there doing evil things, and we're out in the open, and we're not, and the Christians in the church aren't out there saying this is wrong and standing up against it. We have to shine that light, and we have to get out there. We have to show these generations that have forgot who God is, who He is. We have to remind them. And there may be some that have never heard of Him, because they haven't known. They're second, third generation that's, never been to church, never been there. They don't know. We have to share that with these people and shine that light and, take this darkness off the land. God can't bless this and give us favor as a country when we're doing the things that we're doing. When they're, ripping babies from their mother's wombs and slaughtering them, and where they're just letting sin run rampant up and down the street and being prideful and happy and joy and shouting about it. And anybody tries to tell the truth and they shut them down and censor them and don't let them speak the truth. God can't bless that. We're going to have to stand up. It's going to be a hard fight. And, there's going to be sacrifices that are going to have to be made, but we're going to have to do that. And I think that's what we're seeing from this message here this morning, in this word, that, the generation that forgets to pass along God to their children is damning their children. They're cutting their throat. They're not giving them a chance of hope. And, we have to turn and fight that tide now. We have to stand up and draw the line and say, okay, look, there is a standard to live to, and we have to pass that truth out there, and we have to share it and tell others. Verse 9. The children of Ephraim, being armed and carrying bows, turned back in the day of battle. So this is calling us out now. This is our day of battle. We're armed. We know the truth. We know what it is. Are we doing the things we know to do? When He tells us, hey, go tell that person this. Go give them a hug. Tell them, hey, God loves you. He loves you, but He can't help you where you are. You've got to turn away from this world and turn to Him. When He tells us to do that, are we going to do it? When He tells us to sing a song, are we going to sing it? When He tells us to preach a message, are we going to preach it? When He tells us to teach, are we going to teach? If He tells us to, do whatever it is, no matter how small or big, are we going to have what we need? Because it says here in verse 9, they had what they needed to. They were armed, they had their bows, but when the day of battle came, they turned back. Are we going to turn back? If we turn back, there's no blessing in that. We turn away from Him and run, and lay down the standard. We're not His. We won't be worthy. They kept not the covenant of God and refused to walk in His law. Lord, help us if we do that. If we turn away from Him and we know to do good and don't do it, that's sin to us. And if He's taught us the truth and it's been revealed to us and we refuse to walk in it, we turn from it, that's on us. We're condemning ourselves there. And forgot His works and His wonders that He had shewed them. Have we forgot about this? And, I thought about this and, the last couple days, and I've been studying on this and thinking about it, praying about it. And if we're not careful, God can be so good to us that we get spoiled. He can be so good to us that we just get caught up in it and we just assume or say, well, He's going to keep doing it no matter what, and then we let it slip a little bit. You know, because, I mean, if you think back on all the times he's been there, all the times he's delivered you, and all the things that, you know, he's blessed you with, and maybe you were in a spot where you never thought you'd get out, and he delivered you from that, and he set you back up, he cleaned you back up, and he took you back in, and, you know, when you ran away before, and he brought you back, you know, and then we can get comfortable, and we can forget that, you know, yes, he is a good, loving God, and he wants to bless us, but, you know, we have to be obedient. We have to serve him. We can't be slothful. You know, we can't be rebellious. And we can't just say, well, you know, I'm doing pretty good right now, so I'm just going to sit down and chill, you know. Now's not the time to do that. Now's the time to be getting up and working and listening and asking him, hey, am I doing everything I need to be doing? You know, I know I'm doing okay here, but is there something else I need to do? You know, is there something else I need to cut out? Is there something else I need to pick up? You know, Father, show me what the work is and let me know what I'm supposed to be doing here. You know, I don't want to be spoiled. I don't want to get comfortable, because when we get comfortable, we make mistakes. We start slipping. The standard starts to drop. We have to stay in that continuous area where we're just a little uncomfortable, so we keep moving forward, you know, and we don't take advantage of it, and we don't become spoiled and rotten. You know, we have to keep that striving forward, to get closer, to move up, to do a little more, and keep working and moving for him, and not forget these things, and not say, hey, you know, I can't drop and I can't quit now because I've come too far. He's brought me too far. He's delivered me. He's done too much for me to quit now. I can't do it. I can't slow down. You know, maybe I'm a little bit tired, but you know what? There's going to be a spot up the road. He's going to give me rest. You know, but he's going to tell me to rest. It's not going to be me choose to do so. You know, we have to keep up that standard and work for him. And we have to share the things that he's done. And we have to remember these things and praise him and give him the honor and glory for these things, and not let the standard down. Not to slip up, not to trip up, not to stop until we reach the goal and cross the finish line. Marvelous things did he in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. So here we're going back, and they're going to kind of give a recap here of how the children of Israel were. I was talking about earlier when, you know, they did good, and then they kind of slipped a little bit, and they got down. And this was the time when they were in Egypt. And they were under the Pharaoh's kingdom, and they were slaves under the Pharaoh, and how God delivered them. But then how they acted about that. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters to stand as an heap. So that was when they were there, and they were at the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's army was coming after them, and there was no way out. And that's when God divided the Red Sea and heaped up the waters on the side, and they walked through on dry land. You know, he's saying God did these mighty things for us. Did we forget these? In the daytime also he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. You know, that was when he was leading the children of Israel through. Moses and Aaron were driving them through the desert towards the promised land where they were supposed to be going. He clave the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink as of out of the great depths. You know, so they were walking through the desert. They needed water. You know, when God opened up rocks and water flowed out of the rocks, so they could have water to drink, so they wouldn't, you know, dehydrate and die. He brought streams also out of the rock and caused waters to run down like rivers. And they sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. You know, he was doing all these things for them, but they were still complaining and murmuring about it because they were having to get up and move and go do the work to get to the promised land. You know, I guess they just wanted to have all their chains fall off in Egypt, and then God just snapped his fingers and just flashed them materially right straight to the promised land. They were complaining about having to walk to where they were going. They knew what was going to be there when they got there, and all they had to do was make the journey. You know, but they were complaining and murmuring about making the journey. Well, you know, you got to do the work. You know, God's made the offer and he's laid out the table for us, but we have to get to his house. You know, he gave us directions. The Spirit and his word lead us there. You know, Christ paid the price for the trip. We just have to make the trip. You know, sometimes we get spoiled about that and think, well, I've got it whooped. You know, I squared things ago with God, you know, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. You know, I repented. I meant it. I had that conversion. I felt that change, you know. And so I've got to just, you know, sit in the back and sit on the back of the bus and enjoy the ride. Well, no, we can't do that. There's work to do. We got to get up. We got to go work and do things. We have to help others along this way, support each other. And this is, this story here we're looking at, this is about how the children of Israel were letting that standard down and they were getting lazy and slothful. They sinned yet more against him by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. And they tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. Yea, they spoke against God. They said, can God furnish a table in the wilderness? He was already giving them water. As we're going to find out down here too, he was providing food for them, but it wasn't good enough for them. They wanted something else. They wanted more than what he was giving them. He gave them what they needed, but they were being a little selfish and prideful, and they wanted more. And that's a very dangerous thing. It says they were tempting him in their heart by doing that, because they were lusting for more than what he was giving. Even though he was giving them enough, he was supplying everything they needed, but they wanted more. Just like a spoiled brat, like I was talking about earlier. When he's just freed them, he's let them out, he's destroyed Pharaoh's army with the Red Sea right behind them. They never had to lift a finger, and he's done all these mighty things for them. He's providing food, he's providing water for them, and he's taking them to the promised land, but they're not getting there fast enough, so they're whining about it. Have we done that in our lives before? God, I know you're going to do this, but why can't you do it faster? Maybe I need to help you. I know that's where Daniel's failed before. I was like, well, Lord, maybe you're busy. Let me help you. Never a good idea to do that, because we have to stay behind him. When we get out in front of God and try to lead him, that's where we get ourselves in trouble. You got to think about the pride and the arrogance that it takes to think that I could lead this mighty God. And I've done it before, and I've repented, and I've suffered for it, and I've been punished. He's took me up behind that spiritual woodshed and had to straighten me out, and that was all on me. I asked for it, and he had to straighten me out, and I'm glad he did. I'm glad he loved me enough to not let me continue in myself. But, like I said, we have these promises, and we just have to stick with him and stick with his timing, and sometimes these trials and troubles that we go through, they're drawing us closer to him. He's helping us to see and to let go of something we're holding on to that we don't need. And most of the time when it's me, it's because I'm holding on to myself. I'm holding on to some of my strength or some of my wisdom or something of myself that I won't let go of. And he has to take me through a hard time, so I have to let go of it to grab a hold of him. And that's what these children of Israel were doing here. And he's made this promise for them. He's done all these great mighty things, and they're still complaining because they're not getting there fast enough, and they're not getting exactly what they want, even though they have everything they need. So verse 20, behold, he smote the rock that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide flesh for his people? Therefore the Lord heard this and was wroth. So a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also came up against Israel. So, he was providing everything they needed, but it wasn't good enough, and they were fussing. So, of course, he's going to get upset about that. It's just like when you have a child, and you go cook dinner for them, and, you made chicken nuggets, and there's like, well, I didn't want chicken nuggets, I wanted pizza. So they throw a fit. Well, you know what? You're going to eat the chicken nuggets because I'm not cooking again. I'm sure that the mothers have had that conversation plenty of times. Maybe some of the fathers are cooking too, but why can't you just accept what you got? It's good enough. You like it. It's good. Eat it. Why can't you be satisfied with what I brought for you? The same situation here. The children of Israel are getting a little spoiled here. It's like, well, this is good, but it's not really what I wanted. They're in themselves. They're in that pride, and pride is a very dangerous thing. It's a very deadly thing. And you got to very much just, let that go and just be satisfied with what God's give you. Because, if you're not grateful for what he's gave you, why is he going to give you more? He can't pour more out on you if you don't appreciate what you have and use what you've got and accept it, and be thankful for what you have. We can't do that. We can't get spoiled. We can't let ourselves get in that mindset, that trying to take advantage of the God and his love, his mercy, and his grace, and his provision. Because they believed not in God and trusted not in his salvation, though he had commanded the clouds from above and opened the doors of heaven and had rained down manna upon them to eat and had given them of the corn of heaven. Man did eat angels' food. He sent them meat to the full. So, he had manna that was falling down from heaven every morning. They'd wake up and there was bread laying there. All they had to do was get up, walk out, and grab it. The water was coming out of the rocks. He was taking care of all the needs they had. He was protecting them. He was shielding them. He was giving them all the food and clothing they needed, whatever they needed, but it wasn't enough. And it talks about, they had angels' food. This manna that came from heaven, it just wasn't no ordinary bread like they could have had themselves. It was straight from heaven, and it wasn't good enough. So they kept fussing and whining, and so, he decided to move again for him here. He caused meat to fall from heaven. He caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought in the south wind. He rained flesh also upon them as dust, and feathered fowls like as the sand of the sea. And he let it fall in the midst of their camp, round about their habitations. So they did eat, and were well filled, for he gave them of their own desire. So they whined and fussed about it. He gave in, and he gave them some more. He gave them a little bit more of what they asked for. So we're going to read on. They were thankful and thanked him, and everything was good, right? You've seen where this story is going, right? It didn't happen. But they were not estranged from their lust, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, the wrath of God came upon them, and he slew the fattest of them and smote down the chosen men of Israel, because they still weren't happy. They were still complaining. They were still fussing. Even though he stepped it up and blessed them more, they still wasn't enough. They got spoiled and forgot to just be grateful and thankful for what they had. This is a warning lesson, and we need to take it to heart now. We don't want to try to take advantage of God and just, we got to thank him for what we've got. And if there's more that we want, just hold on until he thinks we're ready for it, because, he can't give us something we're not ready for. It'll destroy us. For all this they sinned still, and believed not for his wondrous works. Therefore their days did he consume in vanity, and their years in trouble. When he slew them, then they sought him, and they returned and inquired early after God. And they remembered that God was their rock, and the high God their Redeemer. Again, that's just going back to that cycle that Israel had with God. He'd bless them, they'd grow, and they'd flourish. They'd drop the standard, they'd slide off, they'd start worshiping idols and forget about him. He'd put them in chains and bondage again and punish them. After a couple of generations of being in bondage and chains, they'd remember that, hey, we lived like kings when we worshiped God. We were thankful and praised him and we were obedient to him. Well, he'd rise up a leader, then they would lead him out. He would destroy the enemy and set them free. They'd grow and flourish while they praised him, and then they'd turn their backs on him. They'd go back into chains again. That was that cycle over and over again. And they were hard-headed, and they wouldn't learn, and they wouldn't keep teaching their children the truth and what the history was. There's that saying that those that forget history are doomed to repeat it. Well, that's why God gave us this book, so that we know what the history was and how his dealings with man are. We would know that, if we were vengeful and we were turn away from him and we get caught up in ourselves, that we would have hard times. When we would follow him and we would bless him as a nation, and everybody would walk shoulder to shoulder in obedience with him, there would be blessings and there would be great things happen. It's up to us to choose. What are we going to do? Are we going to bless him, be obedient, and walk in his favor? Or are we going to curse him and follow this world and follow ourselves and be in trouble? Nevertheless, they did flatter him with their mouth, and they lied unto him with their tongues. For their heart was not right with him, neither were they steadfast in his covenant. So they flattered him with words, but they wasn't walking the walk, because they were telling lies. Their hearts were not right. They weren't truly seeking after him. They just wanted just enough of him to have what they wanted, but to live however they wanted to live. And that's a very dangerous thing, because it's going to bring his vengeance upon you, because your heart's not right. Your words can be pretty and you can dress up the outside, but if the inside's rotten, you're rotten, no matter what the outside looks like. But he, being full of compassion, forgave their iniquity and destroyed them not. Yea, many a time turned he his anger away and did not stir up all his wrath. For he remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passeth away and cometh not again. So he still has mercy on them. He still has grace upon us. We keep messing up. He's just trying to get us through those teenage years. Maybe when you started off and, you first got saved, you're young and you're obedient, and you listen and you're good, and, you're thinking, well, I'm just going to listen to my Father. He's telling me what to do. I'm going to learn from this. And then you get into those teenage years where you think, well, you know what? I've learned enough. I know all this stuff on my own. I can do this on my own. I don't need to listen to him anymore. And you rebel. So basically, Israel was in that time frame where they were teenagers and they were being rebellious and fighting against him. And so he had compassion and understood, hey, they're just flesh, they're weak, but I got to punish them, I got to deliver them, I got to find a way to get through to them to make them turn back to me. And they provoke my anger and they want my punishment, but I've got to love them and get them through it. And sometimes you got to punish them to love. Love can be tough sometimes, and God had to give them that tough love. He's had to do that to me many a time over the years. But he's trying to get them through those teenage years where they can be young adults and learn and learn that they need to just keep following him no matter what, no matter how old they are. For he remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passeth away and cometh not again. How oft did they provoke him in the wilderness and grieve him in the desert? Yea, they turned back and tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. We can control God to a point when we rebel because we can turn his favor away from us. We don't have control over him, but we have control over how he treats us and how his blessings are. He can't pour out his blessings on us. We can limit his blessings on us by our disobedience and rebellion. And that's what we're learning here in the Psalm 78 from the lessons the children of Israel had. Yea, they turned back and tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. They remembered not his hand, nor the day when he delivered them from the enemy, how he had wrought his signs in Egypt and his wonders in the field of Zoan, and had turned their rivers into blood and their floods that they could not drink. It's going back through here about all the plagues that God put on Egypt to make Pharaoh let the people go. He sent divers sorts of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs which destroyed them. He gave also their increase unto the caterpillar, and the labor unto the locust. He destroyed their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost. He gave up their cattle also to the hail, and their flocks to the hot thunderbolts. He cast upon them the fierceness of his anger, wrath, and indignation, and trouble by sending evil angels among them. He made a way to his anger. He spared not their soul from death, but gave their life over to the pestilence, and smote all the firstborn in Egypt, the chief of their strength, in the tabernacles of Ham. But made his own people to go forth like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And he led them on safely, so that they feared not, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies. And he brought them to the border of his sanctuary, even to this mountain, which his right hand had purchased. So again, going back through all those plagues that they poured out upon Egypt, their forefathers had saw these things with their very eyes. All the horrendous and wrath that God poured out on Egypt so that he would let his people free. And they heard those stories, they knew those stories, but they weren't enforced. They weren't their fathers weren't living it in front of them, so that they thought they were just fairy tales and fables, and they passed away. We have to make God real to our children. We have to make God real to those around us so that they can believe and they want to know and they want to say, hey, okay, maybe he's not just this, little fairy tale that floats around to give me peace, but he is real and he is true and he can help me and he can deliver me and he can do these things for me if I follow him and I trust in him fully. And I seek him, I can find him, that he is real. We got to pass this along and, make it real. And the children of Israel kept forgetting these things, even though their forefathers witnessed them and saw them. He cast out the heathen also before them, and divided them an inheritance by line, and made the tribes of Israel to dwell in their tents. When they crossed over into the promised land, it wasn't just a wide open territory. There were enemies there. There were nations there. But those nations were enemies of God. They were heathen and they were worshiping idols. And, God delivered all them into their hands and gave them that land. They forgot about that. They forgot about the goodness of God. And they turned their backs on him. And, It's just a terrible thing to think that you have this God that has everything and can give you everything, and you limit his ability to do that with your disobedience. With your pride, with your, it's whatever it is that you're holding on to that he keeps telling you to let go so you can have more of him. We can't fully embrace him and receive what he wants to give us if we're holding on to something else. We have to empty our hands out. We have to empty our minds out. We have to empty our hearts out so he can fill us. And that's what we're getting at here. We can't forget to pass on to our children the things he's done so that they're going to trust in him and they're going to want to seek him too. Verse 56. Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God and kept not his testimonies, but turned back and dealt unfaithfully like their fathers. They were turned aside like a deceitful bow. For they provoked him to anger with their high places and moved him to jealousy with their graven images. They kept turning away, and they kept mingling with the heathen and believing in their gods and turning away in these false idols and making all these images, and they kept turning away. Even though they knew they had the truth. They had the one true God before them. He had blessed them and blessed their people generation upon generation. And they kept turning away because they kept wanting more. They got spoiled. They got comfortable. And they wanted more and more and more. And, I guess that's the message this morning in this lesson is, to be satisfied with God and what he's given you and not to want to seek more of this world. Or if you want to seek more of something, seek more of him. It has to continue to be more of him because outside of him, there's nothing. Outside of God is death. It's darkness. It's wicked. It's evil. Inside of God, there's hope. There's life. There's peace. There's joy. There's everything, but there's life. But outside of him, there's nothing. When God heard this, he was wroth and greatly abhorred Israel, so that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent which he placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity and his glory to the enemy's hand. And again, his strength and his glory, that was Israel. That was his people. That was the chosen people. He put his blessing on them. But they kept turning away. They kept going after these idols and this world and the evils and pleasures and lust thereof. And so he had to punish them. Like a good father would, to straighten his child back out. That's what he had to do. He gave his people over also unto the sword and was wroth with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, and their maidens were not given to marriage. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. Then the Lord awakened as one out of sleep, and like a mighty man that shouteth by reason of wine, and he smote his enemies in the hinder parts. He put them into a perpetual reproach. Moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph, and chose not the tribe of Ephraim. Again, they kept turning away, and so he let them fall. He let the enemy rise up against them, and the wrath was poured out, and they had to take their punishment. We can feel sorry for something that we've done, and we can repent from it, but sometimes, something's bad enough that we're just repenting and turning from it doesn't mean we get to be free from the consequences of it. There's going to be some things we're going to have to go through because of the choices that we've made. Ultimately, if we get our hearts right, we can be forgiven, and we can he'll go through that punishment with us and deliver us. But, sometimes, the choices we make, we have to finish walking down that road. To get back to him, we're going to have to go through the hard times and things. And Israel learned the hard way. But moreover, he refused the tabernacle of Joseph and chose not the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, the Mount Zion, which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like high palaces, like the earth which he hath established forever. He chose David also his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. From following the ewes great with young, he brought him to feed Jacob his people, and Israel his inheritance. So he fed them according to the integrity of his heart, and guided them by the skillfulness of his hand. So God's always going to recognize his people. Even though they may be caught up in the masses that may be evil and wicked and seeking the idols and the lust and pleasure of this world, but he knows where his people are. And he's going to eventually rise up somebody that's going to lead his true people and his true followers out. He's going to pour his blessings out upon them, and he's going to bring them out like he chose David to lead Israel back out. Saul had led them down a bad path. And so he removed Saul and he put David in his place, and David led the people to great heights. And then he passed it on to Solomon, and there was peace in the land. And then Solomon fell. He started falling under the lust of the flesh, and let some of his wives come in that were foreign and brought in the idols, and they were punished again. But God's always going to come back to his people when they come back to him. But we have to move towards him. If there's any moving done, it's us. We moved away from him. He doesn't move away from us. He's standing there with his arms out. We have to turn to him and run to him and stay with him. Stay at his side, stay behind him, and keep with him. And teach our children that that's the safe place, to be there with him, behind him, and following him and seeking him. And, that's where we're at this morning. And, this country's in a hard place, but we can't give up hope. That God sees his people. He knows who's true. He knows whose heart's right. He knows who's seeking him because they love him and they just want him. And, that have accepted his son, Jesus Christ, and are serving him and being obedient, seeking him, reading, studying, wanting to get closer to him. He knows. He knows who's working. He knows who's not being slothful, who's not being comfortable, who's not just settled in and saying, well, you know what, I'm just going to enjoy the ride. I've done enough. If God wants me to do more, then he needs to give me more. That's a horrible attitude, but just, be satisfied with what he's gave you. Do the work that he's called you to do. Keep seeking him, keep working, and just keep drawing nigh to him, and then, if you're faithful with what he's gave you, then he'll give you more. Because he knows he can be, but that's the thing. He can't spoil us. He can't make us rotten, and he's not going to, because that would be an evil thing to do. He's going to correct us. He's going to keep us. He's going to strengthen us, build us up. The plans he has are wonderful and pure for us. He wants us to be good. He wants to do good for us. He's not going to let anything happen to us from him that's going to take us away from him. The answer is always going to be more of him. And when we get that in our hearts and in our minds, and understand that, that when we get to a place where we can get more of him, he's going to pour himself out onto us, and give us more. But we have to be in that spot. And to be in that spot, we have to be obedient. We have to be seeking him. We have to have him first. He can't be 1A and somebody else is 1B. It has to be him and him only. And everybody else has to fall in line behind him. And when we do that, he can bless. And, when something else is in his spot, there's going to be wrath to follow. He's going to give us some mercy and grace, but, when his patience runs out, he's going to discipline us, if we're rebellious. But, if we stay true and we're faithful and we follow him, he can bless us. And, that's that pattern that Israel fell into, and we need to turn away from that. We need to get to those high places with him and stay there and not turn away. And then he can continue to bless us, and then we need to remind our children, so that when we pass on and go on, that they know the right way and that they found him and they'll cling to him and stay with him. And so that they can teach our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren and on and on and on till Jesus comes back. And that's what we got to do, is keep teaching the children the truth, share the light with everybody we can, and pray that they continue to do the same. So, that's where we'll end today.